And we're now going to get at the views. Now, first of all, I want to make for the Law School Forum and for Dr. Szilard an announcement. In the limited time that we will have this evening, there is no question that it will be impossible for some of you to have as much opportunity to talk about this paper with Dr. Szilard as you may wish to do. He has therefore told the Law School Forum that he would be willing to meet tomorrow with any group which would wish to carry further discussion forward on the subject of his paper. And the Law School Forum has arranged for 2 separate meetings to which any or all of you are invited at 11 and at 2:30, 11 in the morning and 2:30 in the afternoon, to be held in the Associated Clubs room of Holmes Hall, which, as you know, is right adjacent to Harkness Commons. Those who can come at either time will be welcomed, but in order to avoid discontinuity in the discussion, you are urged to come on time. Now, second, I have also been asked to announce that those of you who do wish to take advantage of Dr. Szilard's offer to make copies available to you later on, boxes that are placed on the corners of this platform have little slips on them, which if you fill out and send in to him, the address is given, he will be glad later on to have a copy of this paper sent to you.
From tomorrow we'll get a paper.
Copies who will be made available tomorrow at the sessions to those who actually attend them. And now I come to the point in this proceeding for which I gather I was dragooned. I was very curious about what my role was today, and this was intimated to me only as we were coming over here. First of all, as was announced to you by the president of the forum, it was deliberately arranged that nobody but Dr. Szilard was going to give speeches today. This, I gather from your president, is intended to apply not only to those of us on the platform, but to those in the audience. And accordingly, I gather that we are about to welcome questions from the audience and objections from the audience, but in the interest of getting as many people as possible in the act, I am supposed to discourage as firmly as I can either long speeches or speeches at all, or utterly irrelevant questions. Now, why I had to do this, I wasn't sure. Why Mr. Robbins couldn't have discouraged either verbosity or irrelevance, I wasn't sure until I rather gathered from him that maybe experience that I have had in presiding over faculty meetings. But that really is beside the point. The floor is now open for questions. You're asked to come forward to the microphone. There are several seats here in the front. To save time, it is not necessary to wait and come down singly. Come on down and take a seat in the front if you have a question. If there's anyone in the balcony who finds it too inconvenient to come down, I will be glad to repeat a question if you'll hold up your hand. But questioners are urged to come forward and speak to the microphone.
A recent article in The Nation suggests that one of the big difficulties in getting a new policy through in our government is the existence of a so-called military-industrial complex that is now spending a lot of money on what they call propaganda to convince the American people that Russia is their mortal enemy and that the best thing that we can do is to kill them all. How do you assess the power of this so-called military-industrial complex, or do you think that such a thing exists, or what?
I cannot assess that, but I would say the main difficulty is that the liberal Democrats have nowhere else to go. They cannot join the Republicans. And this is a pattern which really immobilizes those who want to influence the Kennedy administration from the Democratic side. The Republicans have so much power because they are in the opposition and because, if you want, what you might call the left wing of the democracy has nowhere to go.
Dr. Szilard, referring to your counsel, isn't it almost certain that in a very short while it will be branded across the country as communist-inspired, and aren't the leaders quite likely to be summoned before the Un-American Committee?
This is quite possible. You see, if you go into politics, you must be prepared that people will throw bricks at you. But I wish, if I have some influence in choosing these people, I wish the American Committee would summon them. This would be a very nice spectacle, and I have no doubt at all who would come out on top.
Another question?
I'm really hesitating to come forward to ask this question because I really don't want to make any speech, but I was really thinking about a lot of questions as you speak, and the reason why I do is because I'm familiar, like many of people here, with the writings of Herman Kahn and Schelling and others, and I was trying to put your speech in perspective of these people, and I find it extremely difficult to do so. But avoiding the speech, I would only like to ask a question which analyzes this, and the question is that you never mention in your analysis the possibility or the need for an international organization to supervise this disarmed war. And I would like, if you could just speak on that issue, and also, since you're familiar with the Russian opinion, to tell us why is it the Russians have held the position they have on the question of inspection.
I do not want to go into the question of inspection because this is a different topic. I personally am convinced that the difficulties of inspection are grossly overrated. And I want to just to draw your attention to the following fact. That the same people who emphasize so strongly that no matter how much inspection we have, we still would not know how many rockets the Russians have, how many bombers they have. The very same people say today that we have reliable information that the Russians have only 50 long-range rockets and 120 long-range bombers. Now, we have now reliable information without any inspection whatsoever. Yet they say that if we have inspection, we still never know.
I'm a little worried about what can a group of goodwill, great scientists or goodwill intellectuals work in an efficient way to do something about such problems. And the thing becomes very acute when you see that even when a group does organize and does do something, the best they can do is find their expression in the New York Times, which is a newspaper that is read by people like them. The question is, how can a group of people of goodwill like you describe, instead of alienating the masses, which still believe that the Committee of Un-American Activities at many instances is defending their business, how can you be businesslike in your operation? And the second question is, why, for example, can't you elaborate how does a group of people with goodwill here can, for example, check the birth rate in China, which is going to be supposedly a very businesslike threat on us? How can we, with all our goodwill sitting here, find businesslike, and because the time scale that we have is not long enough, like educating new congressmen, how can we do something about it?
Well, you have asked two questions. First, how can a group of scientists become politically active? This I have outlined. You see, they would really, their function, what they would supply, they would be trustees of the funds entrusted to them. They would be trustees in drafting a political program, and what they supply is integrity. The political know-how would be supplied by their advisors. I do not envisage an operation where they would go and take and put full-page ads in the New York Times, because this is not the kind of political action which I believe is effective. Now, on the issue of the birth rate, what needs to be done and what has not been done is develop methods which are usable. I can assure you that if there were a pill which a woman has to take any time during a month and which is effective, that it would be bootlegged, it would be sold on the black market, and I have no doubt it would be sold in China also, except if the Chinese really were serious about wanting to increase the population. Now, we know something about that. 5 years ago, it became, maybe 6 years ago, it was official Chinese policy to discourage birth control. They have given up that policy, They are not discouraged. I mean, so they encouraged birth control 6 years ago. Then they reversed their policy. They are not encouraging birth control now. I wouldn't be at all surprised if 3 years hence they would again reverse their policy and go in a big way for birth control. It makes absolutely no sense from a point of view of power politics for China to increase its population beyond what it has now, because all they will get is starvation. More people will not make them stronger, will make them weaker. What we can do is supply the means, and then just wait until they ask for it.
In your talk, you mentioned historical perspective. By this, I interpreted you to mean that we have to sort of believe the communists and us to be more or less moral equals. In other words,
who believes it?
You do.
Oh,
in other words, we cannot take we can't take the position that we are right and they are wrong. But then I would like you to explain how, even in their party program, they propose that the ultimate aim of communism is to take over the imperialists, not necessarily by war, but by what they call peaceful coexistence. The only reason that they need peaceful coexistence is because we will no longer fight the war. Now, whereas we, while we would like to see our democratic views go all over the world, have never proposed that we force these upon any other people.
Well, I think that you have very ably and aptly expressed the majority view. And of course, it's quite impossible in an hour to try to convince you. I am not attempting to persuade or convince anybody that my views are right. You raised the question of moral. Well, I would say, if you pressed me, I would say that I have the impression that we are a little bit better than the Russians, but I'm not sure that this belief is not based on my residual bias.
Other questioners come down. I'm sure that you can persuade previous questioners to make way for you if you do.
Sir, I wonder if you suggested that the people who should lead this movement would be a group of dedicated scientists who would have the insight as to world matters, who would be able to make the decisions and lead this militant minority on the path of truth. I wonder, sir, why scientists would uniquely have this historical perspective when scientists, neither by training nor profession, deal with these matters.
I tried to explain before that what the scientists would supply is integrity. You see, they are trustees. They would formulate political objectives undoubtedly in close cooperation with political scientists and other people who are at home in Washington. What they would then do is proclaim these objectives, and it's up to the people to follow and join them or to reject them. You cannot get political objectives formulated in a mass meeting. It has to be done by a small group, and the scientists probably will not take the lead in formulating this. It will be done by others. But as a matter of fact, was not in the beginning think of scientists. It was discussion with politicians in Washington which convinced me it was their opinion that it would be better if the trustees were scientists.
I have two rather distinct questions. Your first point outlined a certain policy for relaxing tensions, including renouncing first use of weapons. But in accordance with this general policy relaxation, what would you suggest we do in case the Russians either blockade Berlin or, in fact, move into Berlin? And the second point is a somewhat distinct point, and namely, how do you interpret the resumptions of tests by the Russians in spite of their unilateral declaration to the contrary 3 years ago?
Well, these were two questions. I don't know what I would do if Russians moved into Berlin, but I think that, I just don't know. Fortunately, I don't have a responsibility. I certainly would not drop bombs on Russia if this is what you want to know. But moreover, I think that we would have to behave in a very stupid fashion for this to happen. I mean, if this happened, then I would blame ourselves as much as the Russians, because there is no need for this to happen. Why they resumed tests, I can only guess. But I think that Russians were very much interested 4 years ago in test cessation, not because they wanted to stop testing, but because they thought this would be a good first step towards general disarmament, which they very much wanted. 4 years passed, and the general disarmament is not in sight. And if you want to get a guess from me when it was decided in Russia, this of course I don't know, but when was the decision taken to resume testing, my guess would be that it was taken after Kennedy's speech of July 25th, in which he announced a number of military measures, budget increases, and put it in the context of the Berlin crisis, as if the solution of the Berlin crisis were a military matter. We know that Khrushchev got very excited about it because he talked about this to John J. McCloy. This is all I can say.
When you speak of a lobby of well-meaning people, I wonder if you envisage that these well-meaning and informed people would all agree with each other in formulating a problem. It seems to me that one of the concerns is that well-meaning and informed people very often disagree on many of these issues that are not clear-cut in a way that science may differ from politics.
Look, at any one time, there would be a set of political objectives proclaimed by the Council. And those who don't go along with it would not be part of the lobby.
For some 16 years, the United World Federalists have been pursuing aims very similar to yours, Dr. Szilard, without any notable success from a mass standpoint or grassroots standpoint. Of course, they believe that any disarmament must be accompanied by world government to some extent through the United Nations. Now, wouldn't that form a part of your program equally as importantly as the World Federalist attitude is?
I certainly wouldn't say that general disarmament is impossible without a world government. And if I said that, it would be tantamount to saying that general disarmament is impossible. I wouldn't go that far.
Could you please tell us a little more specifically, sir, why it is naive to assume that the Baruch Plan, our offers at the London Conference and in Geneva have not been the best that we could offer, or more specifically, how could they have been improved? And
No, this I'm not prepared to discuss, because this goes into details of a number of different negotiations, and if you think that we did our best in these, you are entitled to this faith, I don't share it.
The question is what capacity the financial supporters would have by comparison with the status of the board of directors. Is that correct? In formulating the policies of the organization that Dr. Szilard has in mind.
They would have absolutely nothing to do with policy. The policy is formulated by the Council. Those who go along with this policy will be regarded as members of the organization if they do a number of things. Among other things, they would have to spend 2% of their income for political contributions. They are not told explicitly where this should go, but by keeping in touch with the lobby, they would find out where these contributions would do some good.
As I gather from your statement, you hope that we can influence the world situation by influencing our government, and its actions in turn will cause a Russian reaction. Do you know from your contacts, or do you think it likely, that a similar group in Russia could get anywhere close to the policy forming?
No.
We don't demand that the questions equal the answers in brevity and cogency, but it would help.
You indicated a moment ago in the answer to a question that you feel that world government is next to impossible. I wonder if you could tell us why you feel that way.
Yes. I believe that a world of law, that is where all international conflicts are adjudicated, a world of law is possible only if there are generally accepted standards of international justice in which people believe. If you don't have such generally accepted standards for what is correct international conduct, then it is impossible even to make a reasoned appeal, let alone to have a court. You can write a constitution on paper. You can set up all sorts of things which you say this will involve government, but you also have to look at where are the loyalties of the people, and you don't create loyalties overnight by writing law.
I want to ask in a little more details. Why do scientists are the people that will be chosen to do this job? I'm a sort of scientist myself. And we have seen scientists operating in this thing. Scientists are not very clever when it comes to politics. Their methods are very good-hearted methods, but they cannot match with organized operations. And let's face it, their antagonists will be people that represent the usually conservative and more militant big business, which are very, very well-financed, well-organized operations, which have much greater funds that you can raise by contribution from students around here to make donations for political campaigns of all sorts of congressmen. And why have the scientists, which are usually people that were not masters of all these tricks, lead us? After all, from scientists came people that usually were led, and were led foolishly by others. I mean, look at the scientists that were working for Hitler Germany. They were all led by politicians in a way that made them believe that they are working for a just cause. I mean, why scientists? Scientists are not very good people.
Well, I don't agree with you. I think scientists can supply two things. They can, above all, they can supply one thing. They can supply integrity and purity. This is very, very important. They would not do the lobbying. They may not even do most of the thinking which goes into formulating the political objectives, but they would proclaim these political objectives. And this, I think, is a good way of doing business. There will be enough other people with political experience who would help. But I can't use these people to form a council from them, because it would lack the purity and the integrity which we need.
Why not mothers in the same context? I mean...
The trouble is, mothers, is there are so many of them, I would not know how to choose.
It seems to me, Dr. Szilard, that you are making an assumption about how rational the Russians really are. That is to say, it seems to me that the great danger comes not from the rational calculations of the Russians, but from the feeling that we have that they are not to be trusted in a rational sense. It seems to me here's where there is some analogy with Nazism. That is, I do feel that Marxism has an intoxicating power, that there is a certain degree of power in this movement in Russia and in the feeling of their leaders, which cannot be depended upon to act as though they were calculating according to the laws of game theory or something.
Well, most people believe that the difficulty in American-Russian relations is that the Russian government is so different from the American government. I hold the opposite view. The difficulty essentially comes from the fact that the Russians and Americans, above all, the two governments are so similar.
If the United States were to renounce the use of the atomic bomb, except under the very limited conditions that you have specified, might we not find ourselves drawn into a series of limited wars in which the economics would be entirely against us, where American soldiers, after years of education, all the money that's spent on their equipment, are fighting in the jungles, all the jungles of the world, against people who are less, who have had less work done upon them?
Well, if we were to use atomic bombs only on our side of the boundary, this would indeed somewhat limit military operations. But this is the price you pay. But look at what you get for it. You get for it a very considerable reduction in the danger of an all-out war. I think it's worth the price.
If the scientists are not to make the decision
where are you going to get the people who are going to make the policy statements? They are presumably all either at Harvard or now in Washington working for the government. Where are they going to come from?
I didn't quite get it. The scientists, if the scientists don't make this...
If the scientists don't make the decision, I think he was alluding to your former remark that not all of the policy formulation in your organization would be done by the scientists. Am I right in that?
The scientists will make the decision, the council will make the decision after carefully listening to political scientists, sociologists, and above all, people who are at home in Washington politics. In the end, they will make the final decision. If they make the wrong decision, this will manifest itself in the fact that few people will join the movement.
I have to repeat for the recorder any question that isn't spoken directly into that microphone. The question was whether Dr. Szilard really feels that the communists do not have any intention to take over the world.
The communists would like to take over the world, but that does not mean that they have a plan to take over the world or that they would be willing to pay a price for a really serious price. For instance, they would be willing to lose 1 or 2 cities for the sake of taking a country and making it communist. If they can get it for nothing, I think they would take over the world. Just as if we could get it for nothing, we would like to see most people living in the democratic and free market society. But we are not going to war over that.
Save time in the long run to come up, and we have 2 vacant seats here for questioners.
Dr. Szilard, your views seem to be diametrically opposed to a scientist who I consider a great menace to America. That's Dr. Edward Teller. I'm just curious as to how you feel the rest of your scientific colleagues are divided. That is to say, are you speaking for a minority group or for a majority group?
I think I'm a majority group among the scientists. And
Dr. Szilard would like to, would be very much interested if he could have a show of hands to get some notion how many people might be interested in joining the discussions tomorrow morning and tomorrow afternoon. Would those who are interested in coming to the 11 o'clock session tomorrow morning with him please hold up your hands? Would now those who are interested in coming to the 2:30 afternoon session please hold up your hands? And of course, attendance is not limited to those who are here tonight. Do we have other questions? The place of the meeting is the Associated Clubs room in Holmes Hall near Harkness Commons. If there are no more questions, I'll express again the appreciation of all of us to Dr. Szilard and declare the meeting adjourned.